I want to start today with an honest question. Do you feel squeezed right now? I don't mean physically, I mean in your soul. Maybe your debts are closing in on you. Maybe your job feels suffocating, you are working harder, but you are not moving forward. Maybe you feel stuck in a life that is too small for you. You feel pressure. You feel stress. And what is our natural human instinct when we feel stress? We want to run away. We say, I just want peace. I just want an easy life. Why is the universe punishing me? We treat stress like a disease. We think it is a sign that something is wrong. But what if I told you that you have it backwards? What if I told you that this pressure you feel is not a punishment, it is a signal? It is a necessary biological signal telling you that you are about to receive something bigger. Today, I want to take you underwater. I want us to learn from a creature that looks strange, but holds the secret to endless growth. We are going to learn from the lobster. Now, look at the lobster. It is a mushy, soft animal that lives inside a very rigid shell. That shell is its armor. It protects the lobster from predators. It keeps it safe, but there is a problem. The lobster grows, but the shell does not. The shell is rigid. It is fixed. So, as the lobster eats and grows larger, that safety shell becomes a prison. It starts to get tight. It starts to squeeze the lobster. The lobster feels uncomfortable. Then it feels pressure. Then it feels intense pain. Imagine you are wearing a suit of armor that is 2 sizes too small. You can't breathe. Every movement hurts. So, what does the lobster do? Does it go to a doctor and ask for a painkiller? Does it start a protest against the ocean for being unfair? No. The lobster understands the signal. The pain tells it, Asterisk, this container is too small for you. It is time to move. Asterisk. When the pressure becomes unbearable, the lobster instinctively goes to a safe place, maybe under a dark rock formation. And there, it does something dangerous. It cracks its own shell. It casts off the only protection it has ever known. For a brief moment, the lobster is naked. It is soft. It is vulnerable. If a predator sees it now, it is dead. But it is only in this naked, vulnerable state that the lobster can expand. It grows a new, bigger shell. And when that shell hardens, the lobster comes out stronger, bigger, and more capable than before. And here is the catch. This doesn't happen just once. As the lobster keeps growing, the new shell will eventually become tight again. The pain returns, the pressure returns, and the lobster has to repeat this risky process over and over again throughout its life. If the lobster had a way to numb the pain, if it had Netflix or comfort food to distract it from the pressure, it would never cast off its shell. And it would die. It would be crushed to death by its own comfort zone. This is the mental model I want you to grasp today. In nature, stress is the signal for growth. But in our modern human lives, we have broken this mechanism. When we feel financial pressure, we don't grow. We take on debt to extend our lifestyle. We numb the pain. When we feel career pressure, we quiet quit or we hide. We refuse to cast off our old shells because we are terrified of being vulnerable. We are terrified of looking stupid. We are terrified of starting over. So we stay small. We stay safe. And we wonder why we feel suffocated. But understanding the lobster is only step 1. The real question is, how do you survive the naked phase? How do you cast off your shell in a brutal economy without getting eaten alive? Next, I am going to show you how this applies to your money and your career right now. I will show you why the most comfortable people are often the most fragile. Okay, let's go back to the ocean floor. Remember the most dangerous moment in a lobster's life? It is right after it sheds the old shell. It is soft. It has no armor. If a predator swims by, the lobster is defenseless. It is vulnerable. This is the part we humans hate. We hate feeling exposed. We hate feeling less than. We hate feeling stupid or poor. But here is the aha moment I want you to write down. Growth only happens in the zone of vulnerability. You cannot get stronger while you are safe inside the old shell. You can only get stronger when you are naked and struggling to build the new one. In our modern world, we have created a society dedicated to avoiding this vulnerability. We have created a painkiller society. Every time we feel the squeeze of life, we have a pill, a loan, or a distraction to numb it. And because we numb the pain, we never shed the shell. We just suffocate slowly inside our own comfort. Let me show you exactly how this is destroying your bank account and your career. Let's talk about money. This is the most common squeeze people feel. Let's say your cost of living has gone up. Inflation is high. Your salary feels small. You feel the pressure. You can't afford your current lifestyle. The shell is tight. What does the average person do? The painkiller approach. They don't want to look poor. They don't want to downgrade. So they use a credit card. They take a personal loan. They use buy now, pay later. What is debt really? Debt is a financial painkiller. It stops the immediate pain of not having money. It allows you to keep the old shell, the fancy car, the nice dinners, even though you have outgrown it. You feel relief for a month, but you haven't solved the problem. You haven't grown your income. You have just built a thicker, heavier prison wall around yourself. And eventually, that debt will crush you. No, look at the Lobster approach. When a financially wise person feels the squeeze, they accept the signal. They say, okay, I cannot afford this life anymore. I need to shed this shell. They do the hard thing. They sell the expensive car. They move to a smaller apartment. They cook at home. They look poor to their friends. They feel vulnerable. But in that space of vulnerability, they are hungry. They start a side business. They learn a new skill at night. They fight. And 6 months later, they have built a new capacity. Their income goes up. They emerge with a bigger financial shell, bought with cash, not debt. They used the pain to grow. The other guy used debt to hide. Now, let's look at your career. Have you ever walked into a meeting room, looked around, and felt like the stupidest person there? You feel like a fraud. You feel like everyone else is an expert, and you are just faking it. We call this imposter syndrome, and it hurts. It is a psychological squeeze. Most people run from this feeling. They stay quiet in meetings. They don't volunteer for the hard projects. Or they quit and find an easier job where they can feel smart again. They retreat back into the small show. But if you understand the Lobster, you realize feeling stupid is a sign of growth. If you are the smartest person in the room, you are in the wrong room. You are stagnating. When you feel that pressure, that fear that you aren't good enough, that is your brain stretching. That is the new shell forming. Don't run from the difficult boss. Don't run from the complex project. Lean into it. Be willing to ask dumb questions. Be willing to look vulnerable. In my 35 years in the corporate world, I saw many young people. The ones who rose to the top were not the ones with the highest IQs. They were the ones who could endure the embarrassment of learning new things. They didn't mind looking naked for a while, because they knew they were building armor that would last. So, the lesson is clear. Embrace the squeeze. Don't know the pain, but there is a risk. Remember, the lobster hides under a rock when it sheds its shell. It doesn't do it out in the open ocean where the sharks are. It manages its risk. If you quit your job tomorrow with zero savings because you want to grow, that is not being a lobster. That is being a fool. You will be eaten. So, how do you find your rock? How do you build a safety zone that allows you to take these painful risks without destroying your life? In the next part, I am going to give you the practical strategy for this. I call it building the fortress. And I will leave you with a final thought on why you should trust the timing of your life. Don't go anywhere.
Stay with me.
We have arrived at the finish line. You now understand why pain is necessary. You understand that avoiding it makes you weak. But I don't want you to go out there and be reckless. Remember the lobster? It doesn't just shed its shell in the middle of a shark-feeding frenzy. It finds a rock. It finds a hiding place. It creates a zone of safety where it can afford to be weak for a while. In your life, what is your rock? It is your financial safety net. I see so many young people wanting to hustle and grind, They quit their jobs to start a startup. They invest their rent money into crypto. That is not bravery. That is suicide. That is a naked lobster walking into a shark's mouth. If you want to shed your shell, if you want to pivot your career or start a business, you need a fortress first. You need 6 months of living expenses in cash, sitting in a boring bank account. Why? Because when you are in the naked phase, when the business isn't making money yet, or when you are learning that hard new skill, you will be stressed. Your savings protect you. They give you the time and quiet you need to harden your new shell. Don't jump off the cliff hoping to build a plane on the way down. Build the plane on the ground, then take off. Now I want to touch on the spiritual side of this, the why. We often ask the universe or God for abundance. We ask for millions of dollars. We ask for the CEO position. But when the pressure comes, we complain. We say, "Why is this so hard?" You must understand the law of capacity. Imagine that abundance is water, and you are a cup. If you are a small teacup and you ask for a waterfall, what happens? The water will come, but it will spill everywhere. It might even break the cup. You simply do not have the capacity to hold what you asked for. The pressure you feel right now, that squeezing feeling, that is the universe breaking your small cup so it can replace it with a bucket. It is stretching you. It is expanding your capacity. If you won the lottery tomorrow without the discipline to manage it, that money would destroy you. We see it happen all the time. The money is the water. Discipline is the cup. So, when you are under pressure, do not panic. Shift your perspective. Smile. Tell yourself, I am being expanded. I am being prepared for something that is too big for my old life to hold. There is a saying, the burden is never heavier than the back that carries it. If the burden is heavy, it is a compliment. It means your back is strong enough, or it is about to become strong enough to carry it. My friends, young and old, my final advice to you is simple. Stop praying for an easy life. Stop wishing for the stress to go away. A life without stress is a life without growth. In nature, things that do not grow are dying. Instead, pray for a strong back. Pray for the wisdom to navigate the storm. Pray for the courage to shed your old shell when it becomes too small. Be like the lobster. Do not fear the squeeze. Fear the comfort. Fear the warm, cozy bath. It slowly cooks you alive. Embrace the cold, dark ocean where real growth happens. Let people see you struggle. Let them see you driving the old car while you build your business. Let them see you starting from the bottom. Let yourself be naked and vulnerable for a season. Because you know something they don't. You know that under that rock, you are building a version of yourself that is bulletproof. Home tonight. Look in the mirror. Ask yourself, am I running from the pain, or am I using it? Thank you for listening to an old man's ramblings today. If this video gave you a new perspective, share it with a friend who is feeling the squeeze. Tell them it's time to grow. Take care of your risk. Build your fortress. I will see you in the next one.